Hey, greetings, Fred in Alaska. Thanks for joining me. Little bit of an update. Miss Carol chose to go back up to North Pole until the snow melts more. Her words were she was feeling really closed in with all the snow. She wasn't able to move around and feel comfortable. So she went back up to the North Pole until snow melts, and then we'll meet up with her again. Um, anyway, there's well, this is kind of a long one, but it's from right around the turn of the 20th century, gold rush times, approximately 1898. Uh, Fritz and Johann. Now, I got this from another guy named Fritz, and this is from his great grandfather and his expedition into the Yukon and then on into Alaska. But he, because of the nature of his great grandpa's experience, near the Beaver Mountains, he chose to share it. It took him a while, language barrier wise. He actually hired an interpreter, and when he called back the other day, he actually had an interpreter through him tell me the overall. I'm sure there's a bunch of details that are gonna, lost in translation, but let me give you the skinny, so to speak. So it started in the Yukon Territory. Johann and Fritz, they had their grub stake. They were going, make their millions or whatever, gold fever. Well, they didn't like the way things were going in some of the mining areas. There was murders and things like this, and they were from the old country. I guess it would be Austria, and Germany, that area or whatever. So they were like, we'll go on, we'll go to other places. Well, they hired on a couple Gwich'in Indian trackers slash guides, and they ended up going down the Yukon River, and they reached a place, and arduous journey. You got to understand, this is back where they didn't have a ferry service on the river. You cut down trees, fashion logs together, and God bless the dead. You go for it. So they had a couple mules, they had the guides, and they had 4 dogs. It was Fritz, Johann, the 2 guides, and 2 other fellows that were amongst their party. So there was a total of 6. Now, they had various issues, logistically speaking, fighting all this equipment and all their grub stake and everything from the banks of the Yukon on into the interior to the Beaver Mountains. Now, where they ended up getting to was Billy Goat Creek, which is modern Billy Goat Creek. Now, if you look at Google Maps, you'll see the Beaver Mountains, and it's to be the southwest side. You'll see Billy Goat, and it kind of has a little J-hook kind of thing from it topographically. Now, those topographicals serve no justice to boots on the ground. Trust me, totally different environment once you get down in there. It's rugged, dense forests, peaks. It pristine, beautiful wilderness. It is just thick. So, just a note of interest, opposite side of the mountains, just more recent times, there was also some stuff that had happened. I'll share in the future. But so what intrigued me was this was back, gold rush times or whatever. And what Fritz had found out was this story had been passed down orally. And so it struck him when he heard me talking about, the oral tradition and whatnot. So he did digging and, through the family and some old journals and whatnot, and pieced together what happened outside of what was shared verbally, which I found intriguing. I was like, cool. At least there was other places where, they kept a good oral tradition going. So modern day Billy Goat Creek, they are there. They were there for 2 weeks. They were there long enough to have had most of a cabin set up because winter was coming on. The 2 Gwich'in guides, they went and they basically were berry picking a few miles from where they had camped. They were wrapped to the northwest side of the slopes of the Beaver Mountains looking for berries. They came back to camp petrified. Both their rifles were emptied, but no one heard any shots in camp, and they were only a couple miles away, so you would think they would have heard a report of a rifle or something, but they didn't, because the dense forest and everything, it just the forest ate the sound, basically. So when they come back, they're explaining to Johann, hey, there's a hairy man. It came down the slope. It was growling and throwing rocks, so we fired at it. It got mad. It was breaking trees, and they retreated back to camp. And the whole while back to camp, they would turn around, put shots in the air kind of above this thing, because it was systematically stalking them. It was cutting across the trail and constantly progressing towards them, only taking cover when they were lifting their rifles. This thing was dead set on getting them out of there or getting them, one of the two. It wasn't coming to, play kickball or nothing like that. So they explain this to Johann. Johann immediately gets Fritz's attention, because they had heard tales and stuff, and they just thought it was local folklore, and just chalked it up to overactive imaginations. But now they're guides that they trusted for months now. This wasn't just a weekend trip. This was months that these people were together. They got to know each other. It wasn't just some fly-by-night outfit packing them in and packing them out. So they trusted what they were being told. They just were having a hard time comprehending exactly what they were talking about. But they didn't have to wait long. As they were outside and they were pointing back up into the area, the direction in which they had just come, they noticed dark movement in the trees. Now, the dark movement was across this creek, approximately 200 yards away. They couldn't make it out, but it was big, it was dark, and it was moving through the trees, and it almost looked like it was kind of zigzagging or pacing back and forth. Now, it gets broken at this part because there was some things lost in translation. So what ends up happening is they retreat into the cabin. And when they retreat into the cabin, the cabin starts getting pelted with rocks. And so they're sitting there for a while. They had no windows for this place. So it was a cabin built with no windows, just a door. The roof wasn't completely done yet. This type of thing. It was strictly to have a place to pan for gold, look for other places. There's creeks all along in those mountains that they were looking for gold. This is back in the time where they planned on being gone 2, 5, 8 years, whatever. It wasn't like, I'm going to go on a weekend trip. So keep that in mind. So they're backed into this cabin. Rocks are hitting it. Some of them are coming through, and they have no line of sight. They're inside, so they can't see anything. So what they decided to do is they took some of the stuff they had in there, some of the supplies, stacked it up, and Fritz got up with his rifle and was looking out a hole over by the corner of the cabin in the direction of where the rocks are throwing. And he's just sitting there observing. He has his rifle ready and everything. He's observing. Well, this thing was going up and down the creek. According to what was said, it was doing the stomping thing, splashing in the water, kind of making a display, almost like a challenge, is how it was interpreted. Who knows? We're speculating. But so it's stomping along, and it would stop periodically, grab grapefruit-sized rock, and chuck it over at the cabin. Fritz said it was throwing it it wasn't like winding up for a fastball. It was just lobbing these rocks over there like nothing. It just, every once in a while, it would chuck a rock. So they took it as it was challenging them to come out. And the Gwich'ins were off in the corner. They reloaded their guns, and they were talking amongst each other. And Johann asked them, hey, what do your people do about this? They told him clearly, our people flee. We get out of there. We get out of here. We should be leaving. We should go. This is the hairy man's mountain. So they take that into consideration. They have all their supplies there. They just got this cabin almost done. And they're like, well, how about we kill it? So that was their thought. Well, the other two guys that were with them were younger guys. They were hired on. They were not seasoned mountain men. They basically came with the gold rush. They were rookies to the wilderness. I believe, if I'm not wrong with the translation, they were from Missouri, St. Louis area originally. Now, these guys were armed. and they wanted no part of what was going on, but they wanted out of there. And their way, as far as what they knew, to get back to the Yukon was the direction this thing was now prancing, pissed off. So they all decide, well, we'll go out there together, we'll make a united front, and we'll all have our firearms pointing at it. The Gwich'in were like, we're not going with you. They stood there, they're like, no, if it comes in, we'll fire. We're not going out to confront this thing. They had already were seriously regretting popping shots at this thing as they were fleeing back to the cabin. So now it's one of those, who's going out first? So Fritz still up there. He peeks. He's like, it's still, at this time, it was still pacing, and approximately 125 yards away, maybe at the most, okay? Now, there's a translation thing here. Could have been a little closer, could have been a little further, so just keep that in mind. This is 1898-ish, you know, in that time frame. So, none of them really want to be first, but Fritz hops down, says, it's over there, we got time, we can all get out and have our guns on this thing, and we'll take shots. So they all got ready, swung the door open, ran out, and as they were coming out and lining up shoulder to shoulder to put rounds down range on this thing immediately squats down on all fours, real low to the water, and they start popping, and they're frantically shooting. They assume they hit it a couple times because it kind of went back and forth, and then stood up and ran back the way it came out of the trees, but it didn't go very far. They saw it go into the trees and was kind of thrashing around and making this weird noise. It wasn't a scream, and that's lost to history. It was just making a weird noise, is the best I could get from that. So they chalked it up to a mortal wound, right? So they're like, okay, good, we got it. Let's retreat back into the cabin. Let's give it time, and then we'll go and we'll go track it. Brave people, man, I tell you. So they get back inside. They tell the Gwich'ins what's going on, because the Gwich'ins heard the fire and they were curious, asking, and they're like, no, we need to go. We can't be here. Now it's even more upset. We have to go. We're leaving. You guys can stay. We're leaving. 2 of the 4 dogs, okay? All the dogs were inside. They weren't doing squat diddle. I don't know exactly what kind of dogs. It was just 4 dogs. 2 of the dogs belonged to one each of the Gwich'ins. They got their dogs. They heard the thing across the way. They slunk around to the back of the cabin with enough provisions to get the hell out of Dodge, and they took off their own direction. Don't know whatever happened to those guys, but they basically said, up yours. This has gone too far. We're not part of this. We're not going to be part of it. And remember, they built a relationship over months of hard work together. So it wasn't trivial, like, I don't know you very well either, so bye. It wasn't that trivial. Very hard decision, but they had their belief system. I don't know exactly what that is, so don't quote me on any of that. It's just they saw enough, heard enough, wanted no more to do with it. We're out of here. Boom. And I can imagine just the thought of having a little bag on a stick and your rifle and a dog and going through. You got to understand, the Beaver Mountains are out there. You're just not, it's just not a little scenic bike path to this place. You earn it. To get there, you got to earn that shit. So you're either getting in by plane nowadays, or helicoptered in, or you're rafting and hiking like a motherfucker. So it's ugh. I could just imagine. So anyway, so they bag it. Now, it being going on to close to winter and berry picking season, the light cycle is probably at that point in time probably close to 12:12, and it was a couple hours before it was to get dark. So Gwich'ins are gone. The other 4 are there. Fritz and Johann are upset that their guides had left, but they knew enough and paid attention enough where they were to get back to the Yukon River and whatnot, and, you know, float down to another village or whatever once they were done. So the other 2 dogs, they decide, okay, we're going to go tie the dogs up outside and that'll be a deterrent from this thing. So they tied the dogs up outside. They had them on each forward-facing corner of the cabin towards the creek. Now, again, because of translation and things getting lost to time, the exact distance from cabin, dogs, and all that is just impossible to, determine for sure. So, dog on each corner, limited leash, basically to make noise. Well, problem with that idea was the dogs did nothing but try to dig a hole under the cabin and not be outside. They wanted nothing to do with the outdoors whatsoever. So they're basically going in and out of the cabin, kind of looking around, going in 2 at a time. It'd either be the 2 younger guys or Fritz and Johann. They would circle around, and it was getting on in the dark, so they stopped their patrols at a certain time and just hunkered down. Nothing happened that night. They heard weird screams way off in the distance that it was just, they didn't know what. And so it went on like that, just quiet for days after the initial Gwich'ins getting chased, them leaving, shots fired and all that. So days go by. It calmed down enough to where they finished the roof on the cabin, what they had left to do on that. And they determined, okay, well, we had it out with this thing. It's done with. It's all over. So not quite a whole week has gone by, and the Gwich'ins return. They returned because the path they chose, it was just impassable, so they had to backtrack all the way around. So they stopped. They thought the worst. They thought they were going to come back and everyone would be gone or dead or something horrible. So when they get there, they explain that they saw 2 other ones on the other side of the Beaver Mountains, higher up in elevation, and they didn't pay no attention to them as they were traveling through. So they know that there's 3 of these things in the general area, who knows where. So the Gwich'ins explain that. They tell them, hey, it's been quiet here since that day. We've had the dogs out there, but they do nothing but try to dig under the cabin and hide. The Gwich'ins' dogs that they took with them ran away at some point. That wasn't explained, but their dog's gone. They weren't attacked or anything like that. They just lost to time. So they agree they'll stick around for a couple days, but they're leaving the area. They want no parts of what's going on as far as the hairy man. So they stay another day or 2. They double check their provisions and everything. Everyone wishes each other luck, and they leave. They just follow the creek straight on out. They don't try to wrap around. They take extra precaution to go above and beyond going around this area. Yeah, at least that's what they told Fritz and Johann. So it's, more than a week has passed or what have you. Again, time, it's kind of hard to say exactly how much time had passed. But so one morning, one of the younger guys got up and was going down to the creek, and it was just freezing up enough to where he'd have to break the ice at the river's edge, but it was still open out towards the middle of the creek, and he wasn't trying to go out in his ankle calf high deep water to get water. So he was breaking the ice with a stick, or actually I apologize, the butt of the rifle that he brought with him, because everywhere everyone went after that initial encounter, they were always armed. He breaks it up, he sets his rifle down, and he's dipping the bucket in to fill it, and he's kind of getting the ice chunks out of the way and whatnot. And he hears a piercing whistle coming. It sounded like it was just on top of him. He looks across the creek, and just across the creek, inside the tree line, this thing is squatted down looking at him. He immediately drops the bucket, grabs a rifle, shoulders it, and when he aims in the area, he just saw this thing, it wasn't there. So he starts yelling into the cabin, hey, hey, hey. Fritz and the other younger guy were asleep at this moment because this is pretty early in the morning. So Johann comes out, and with his rifle, he's yelling at the other guys to get moving or whatever. And he says, I seen it right across the creek, and it's somewhere over there. I just seen it. So they start looking around, you know, start yelling, hey, get out of here, get out of here. Johan shot a couple shots just to let him know, hey, you know, anytime you come around, this is what's going to happen, kind of deal, kind of making a stand. And retrieved the bucket and got the water. They retreated back inside. It got to a point to where they decided to, instead of, because of how cold it was getting, they decided to cut a small peephole into the wall of the cabin to where they can easily open, look out, and assess and close. Cool. You know, I mean, me personally, I would have already been on the Yukon and somewhere far away from there. But they were determined. They had some promising sign as far as finding flakes in their gold panning, you know, because that's the whole reason they were there, was to prospect. Let's not lose track of that, because that's, you know, in the day-to-day, that's what they were doing. They were trying to sluice and do whatever they could to mine this place, see if it's worthwhile. So as the time is going on, there's a foreboding from what was explained. The early evenings became in essence terrifying, and the reason it became terrifying is because these things would be near the cabin but out of view, and they would all scream and bellow and all this stuff all at the same time, just as it was dusk, just as it was getting dark. It would happen nightly. But when they would come out and try to pop shots towards the directions of sound and all that, nothing would happen. It would just go quiet, and that was it. So that went on for a little while. The very first snowfall. Now remember, the time frame is, you know, it's drawn out. I'm kind of condensing it, but this is over time these things are happening. So first snowfall, just a few inches, basically a dusting. Very crisp morning. The two younger guys are going to set snares for hare. Their provisions were at a point to where they thought it best to start planning ahead, getting snares and traps out for wild game now, and go and find a moose. So the youngsters had a mission, and there was a lull of quietness with activity around them and stuff, so they felt a little more comfortable. So they went south of where they were and down out onto the tundra towards where it flattened out to see where the moose were moving and whatnot. So they set some snares and some willows along the way for rabbit, and they were basically looking for small game, moose, caribou, what have you. So they get to this spot, and they're just kind of looking around. They don't see any sign of moose at that point, so they're coming back. Now they're following their trail directly back. It's daylight. They got plenty of light. The sun is out. It's crisp and cold, but the sun is out, and you know, they can see. It's not like it's dark and ominous or anything, but they can see clearly. So according to what was said, these guys were on their way back, and one of their snares, second or third one, already had a snowshoe hare in it. So they're like, score, you know, hey, this is promising. So they take the rabbit, they reset the snare, and they continue back towards the cabin. The approximate distance wasn't related, so I don't know. I'm assuming a little bit of a ways. If they're setting up snares, they're not going to set them all just right here. You know what I mean? They're going to spread them out to different promising looking areas with tracks and sign. So they get the hare, and they're heading back towards the cabin. And when they're getting back towards the cabin, they see the one that the younger guy saw across the creek, you know, a few weeks before, however long before, on the back side of the cabin, peeking around the cabin at them as they were walking up. And with all the trees and stuff, initially they weren't sure what they were seeing until they got to a spot clear enough from about maybe 25 feet, and this thing peeked around again, looked right at them, and then they heard thrashing from the backside, out of view, running away. So immediately Fritz and Johan inside heard that commotion, felt the thud in the ground, come out, meet up with the two younger guys. They say, hey, it was just behind the cabin, you know. So they put up the rabbit, they grabbed extra ammo, they all got their rifles, and they're gonna track it in the snow. put an end to it. They all head on out. They tracked it for approximately 3 to 4 miles, and then this thing went into a creek, and that's where the tracks disappeared, because it must have went up or down the creek somewhere to where they couldn't track it and find its tracks easily. So they retreat back to the cabin. When they got back to the cabin, the 2 dogs were missing, and that snowshoe hare was missing, along with a bag of either cornmeal or something along those lines, but one of those big bags. So they lost dogs, rabbit, and cornmeal. And so, and when they got back, the door was left open. But other than that, it was unmolested outside of the dogs missing, the rabbit, and so on. So they immediately, they're like, well, this ain't right. These things are going to continue, and we have no real way. So it was a very hard decision they made to shut it down. They had to get out of there before it got any later into winter, and you know, it was impossible traveling. So they made the split-second decision. Let's shut it down. They got their provisions. They no longer had dogs to help. The mules, let's not forget the mules. The whole time this was going on, they lost one of the mules. One of the mules had been attacked, and they had to put it down. Its back leg was partially torn off, and it appeared to have not quite a fully broken neck, but broken enough to like disable it to where it was still moving around or whatever, because they came upon it rather quickly after the leg got torn or whatever. This had happened previous. So they had the one left. They loaded what they could onto it. They grabbed their makeshift snowshoes and stuff that they've had, and they all got out of there. Now, again, forgive me, there's certain things that were lost during the translation. The whole thing with the mules and all that, it's, if I get clarification, I'll redo the video. But that's the portion that I couldn't get enough information on, because I was curious from the jump. Well, you know, keeping them, how, you know, what were they feeding them, all that kind of stuff. But anyway, so they got it, and they packed on out. They made their way towards the Yukon, and that's where what he knows of ends. So I'm sure there's an adventure from where they started to get there before all that shit happened, and then an adventure afterwards. Because remember, this is back in the day where when guys went on, you know, to go gold mining or whatever, prospect, they went vast distances, and they were gone for years at a time. So there was other places that, you know, his great-grandfather went and what have you, but you know, those two are kind of lost to time, exactly what, where, and how, and all that. But I could just imagine going through the trouble. Now me, I'm Native American, so I already get why the Gwich'ins get the hell out of there, dude. I would have been with them, but just the hardiness of some of these people to go to a strange land and survive and do it. Kudos, man. My hat's off to them. Not uncommon for dogs to get whatever. The mule, see, I wanted to hear more about the mule thing, because when he was telling me that, I was like, what happened? You know, I mean, half torn off leg and neck partially broke, like, what, you know, give me the goods. But there wasn't enough there. Again, Fritz, dude, thanks for going through the effort of hiring an interpreter. Like, y'all give Fritz a shout out, man. He went above and beyond, because me and him had a language disparity. His English was very broken. He was speaking half, I guess, Dutch and half English, so it was rough. But I want to thank him for hiring the interpreter and forking out his own money to be able to share this with us. So, dude, thank you very much. Shout out to Poland, Finland, Sweden, all those countries. I appreciate you guys' support. Thomas, Lublin, Poland. Dude, thanks for the email. Thanks for the heads up on some of those things. I sincerely appreciate that. Miss Carol, If you're watching this, I look forward to you getting back home soon. Once the snow melts, we'll meet up again. And thank all of you guys for joining me, the new subscribers. And again, what I just shared, circa 1898, Beaver Mountains, Alaska. Crazy. All right, y'all have a good one.